Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Again, I apologize, I am still fighting this summer cold. Hopefully I will be done with it soon. Today we are going to be making what I planned to be 2 cards, but ended up turning into 3. So I have this just a floral hello from PinkFresh Studio. And what's nice about this is the floral images are one stamp, and then all of those sentiments are another stamp. And there are stencils with this and dies, and it is just a really wonderful set. I have 2 card bases here. I wanted to make a different size card today, so I have 2 card bases that are 4.5 by 4.5. And then I have some HAMMERMILL cardstock that I'm going to stamp this floral images on some HAMMERMILL cardstock with some VERSAFINE ink, and I do end up stamping them twice. I think my ink pad is starting to dry a little bit and needs a good re-inking. So I'm going to stamp both of these panels twice. These are just A2 size, but they're kind of wonky, so I use them to stamp images on instead of trying to figure out how to even them out for a card front. They're kind of just a miscut, and so they work for things like this. Like I said, I'm going to stamp these twice, and then we are going to make 2 different kinds of colorways for these cards today. For the stencils, there are 3 different stencils that do kind of the flowers and the main and the filler flowers, and then there are 2 stencils for the greenery. Here I'm showing you that you could do they have just 2 colors of flowers here. I end up trying to do 3. It's a little more successful on one card than the other, but I do end up using some smaller blending brushes to help me accomplish the coloring today. Like I mentioned before, I have 2 colorways that I'm going to be using today. These are all from my color cube, and this is volume 2. This is card number 59. And it kind of has these reddish tones and then a black, like a really deep purple and a black. So I went into my swatch book that I have all of my ink swatched in, and I found these colors. And I'll show you these more when we actually get to it. This is the other card that I randomly picked. This is card number 210 from volume 2. And I really like this color combination. I'm going to show you when we get to it how I would have done this a little different, but I really liked this color combination. So I have MATCHA from Catherine Pooler and Hot Mama from Simon's regular ink line, not their positively saturated one. And then I have JUNIPER, Midnight, and Rainforest from Concord and 9th. And that's what I'm going to use for one of the other color combinations today. I did go through and heat set both of those panels just to ensure that I didn't get any smearing. And here I pulled out my, I think it's 8 by 8 waffle flower grip mat, and I'm going to use that to hold my stencils in place. Normally I would take off the backer of both sides of that grip mat, but I just was trying to kind of try something a little different, and I kept the one backer on so that I could scoot this around a little bit if I needed to. Here I have Rockin' Red from Catherine Pooler, and I just stuck that to that grip mat. It holds on tight, but I can move that whole mat around if I needed to. So I'm going to just kind of brush and clean off the brushes of any residual ink from something that I had on there previously when I ink blended. And I just use a flour sackcloth to kind of dry that off a little bit, or get some of that residual ink off. So here, when I first started to ink blend, I was doing it very light-handed. The color inspiration is much deeper and more saturated, and so I do kind of build up the color just to kind of make it coordinate with that color inspiration a little better, but I did start off very, very light. And this is just a wash of color over all of it. I'm not doing anything fancy, just a simple wash of color. When I had that built up to what I liked, I took a smaller ink blending brush and the MERLOT ink from Simon's regular line, and I'm just adding that to the berries. I'm putting down a pretty heavy amount of this MERLOT. I wanted there to be to where it looked like I had 3 different flowers in here in 3 different colorways. This one isn't very successful as far as that, but I was trying to challenge myself and stick with that color inspiration. So I was trying to do the best I could with what I was kind of given. So I do try to wipe that stencil off before I remove it, particularly if it's a very juicy ink pad. I don't want to kind of have the ink beading up so that when I put the next stencil on top, it smears. So I do try to kind of wipe that off. This is the second layer for the flowers, and it adds details to the images we've already done. And this one I'm going to do in Cranberry Fizz from Catherine Pooler. This is a much deeper, oh no, I apologize, I'm doing this in the MERLOT. So I already did those berries in the MERLOT. So I'm going to add a second layer to those. I end up going back and adding in, it's edible eggplant from Gina K, just because it wasn't enough distinction between the 2 colors. So again, nothing fancy here, just a solid wash of color. And here I came in with that edible eggplant using a smaller ink blending brush, just so that I could put the detail layers of the of those like berries in a darker color. And then I do kind of wipe that stencil off just so that I don't smear that ink, because that edible eggplant was pretty juicy. Using another small ink blending brush, I'm going to use Cranberry Fizz to do kind of like the filler flowers on here. And I'm going to take some of that MERLOT ink. I think I used the MERLOT, and an even smaller blending brush. I purchased several sets of these off of Amazon. They're kind of even more like detailed blending brushes, and they kind of have an angle to them. I'm going to take the tiniest one, and I think I'm going to use that edible eggplant, and I'm just going to put a little bit of that on this blending brush, and this blending brush picked up ink really, really well. So when I put this first detail layer on this one, it was really saturated and it was really dark. And it was kind of a harsh line there. I could have gone back and ink blended that a little bit more, but I didn't want to add more color to it. So these little blending brushes I was pretty darn impressed with. They kind of have a longer handle, which is nice. And I love the white and the gold. And I think the fact that it is kind of angled will be helpful. So I'm just at the very base where I think I want it to be the darkest. I'm taking some of that edible eggplant and just adding some depth down at the bottom, just to give it a little more interest and dimension. I did end up darkening up those kind of filler flowers with another layer of that Cranberry Fizz, just so that, again, there would be a little, it would look like I had 3 different shades of red flowers instead of just 2. Moving on to the greenery, this color combination didn't have, obviously, like a green color. So I chose to use the edible eggplant is not only the base layer for the leaves, but also the detail layer. So here I'm just doing a very, very light wash of that edible eggplant, which almost makes it look kind of like a dark gray with a purple undertone. I'm using the black from that color inspiration as I'm using the black outline of the stamped image as the black for the color inspiration. But here, for some reason, and I may just be really weird, y'all. You can tell me. I can take it. But when I was finished with these, this color combination made me think of Dracula. Like, it was just really deep, dark, blood red colors and like black. It just made me think of Halloween and something that Dracula would give to his bride. I don't know. I'm so weird. It turned out prettier than I thought it would. But here you can see that edible eggplant, that light layer of it, made it look like almost like a purpley black, which is not bad. It's just I was trying really hard to stick with that color inspiration. And I felt like I got a different shade of that edible eggplant color than I wanted to. But the nice thing about those color cubes is when you flip them over to the back, it'll show you like different levels of saturation for that color that's on the front. And you can know that if you stay within the kind of like that color saturation level, everything's still going to be cohesive and look nice together. So this is everything all blended. I'm going to clean this up, and then we're going to work on our next color combination. I think that one turned out a lot prettier than I anticipated, but again, it reminds me of something Dracula would give to his bride. Nothing wrong with that, though. Even Dracula's bride needs flowers. So this is the second color combination. This was card number 210, also from volume number 2. And if you look at those flowers, so this is where I was going to tell you that if I was going to do this again, I would have added this extra step in here for myself just to give myself a little bit more true color. So the bud on there has like purple tips and a green like body, I guess you could say. Well, I wanted to mimic that in these flowers, in these larger flowers. So I am putting a light wash of this matcha ink from Catherine Pooler, just using kind of a bigger blending brush and trying to avoid those berries. I'm going to do the berries in a different color, but I wanted to give these flowers a light wash of that green. Then I'm going to use the Hot Mama from Simon's regular ink line. This is not their Positively Saturated line. And I'm going to use a smaller ink blending brush, and I'm going to ink blend those berries. So we're going to have purple berries on these flowers, on this arrangement. And then moving on to the detail layer, I took another one of those teeny tiny little blending brushes, and I am using the Midnight ink to add the detail layers to those purple berries. This is a very juicy ink pad, and so it took very little to no ink to get these berries colored in. But for the detail layer on those larger flowers, I am going to go ahead and wipe this this excess ink off just so that I don't get that blue into my green here. So going back, this is the step I would have done something a little different. Purple and green normally are going to make you kind of like a gray-brown color because they have all the colors of the rainbow in them. When you look at them separately, they have all the colors of the rainbow in them. So they would make a brown. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, okay, I want this purple to stand out more because that purple on the inspiration card was kind of in your face. And I wanted this purple to stand out more. So in my mind, I went ahead and added more of that Hot Mama. What I should have done is put a layer of white pigment ink down, dried that, and then put the purple on. That would make sure that I didn't get a kind of a desaturated gray-brown color, and it would have made the purple stand out even more. I should have done that way. Or I thought about it later, I should have done the purple first as the base flower color, and then done the green as the accent. Still continuing to do that white pigment ink layer in between just so that we would get a more true color. Going back, I wish I would have done it that way, but it doesn't look bad, and it doesn't look as like desaturated gray-brown as I feared it would get. So it turned out okay. But if you wanted to remake this card and you wanted that purple or, perhaps that green to stand out even more, use a layer of white pigment ink in between. For these accent flowers, filler flowers, I learned my lesson, and I realized that these ink pads are very, very juicy, and this is the Rainforest ink. Or maybe it's the Juniper. One of those two. But if you notice, I tapped off a lot of that ink onto the stencil, and then when I needed more ink, instead of going back to the ink pad, I just picked it up from the stencil. That way I wasn't wasting ink, and I was using what I had, and I wasn't coming in like super hot and heavy. This is the Juniper ink. This isn't the Rainforest. So to add a little more depth, now I'm going to break out with that Rainforest ink and another one of those teeny tiny blending brushes. And I'm going to, oh no, I just used a heavier amount of the Juniper. I lied to you. I just used a heavier amount of the Juniper and tapped some of it off. And this is going to do what we did on the last card, just giving these accent or filler flowers a little more interest and depth. For the base layer of the leaves, this is the Juniper ink. Just did a wash of that, and then for the detail layer, I think I used the Rainforest ink for that. I lied to you, I used more of the Midnight ink. And so this is it all ink blended. This is the Rainforest, the Juniper, the Midnight, the Matcha, and the Hot Mama. So what's lovely about these stamp and stencil and die sets from PinkFresh Studio is that the die is all one die, the stamp is all one stamp. And so I just ran these through my die cut machine and they cut out both of these layers and they did a beautiful job. So I, from a previous crafty session, had already cut out and stamped a lot of those greetings. And so I just picked 3. I wasn't sure which 2 I would use for these cards. I ended up making 3 cards, but at this point in time, I did not know I'd be making 3 cards. So I did a little bit of fiddling. Again, I wanted to try a different card base size. And so these are 4.5 by 4.5, and I'm just going to do some arranging and fiddling, trying to figure out what sentiment to put with what, and what kind of arrangement I wanted to have. For the Dracula type card, that's what I'm going to call it, I felt like it needed something. I felt like it needed some more color. So I have this embossing folder that I got from Hobby Lobby, I believe. And it's an Elison and Sizzix embossing folder. And I didn't realize this, but it has like multiple layers of these hexagons on there. And I didn't know that when I bought it. I didn't know what it looked like until I actually ran it through. And I was like, this is super cute. I really like that. So I just cut that down. It ends up being, I think 4 by 4. And I liked this better. I felt like the sentiment and the flowers were just getting lost on all of that white. And I felt like it needed something. So I'm going to go ahead and just glue this down flat to the card base here. And then we will go ahead and I'm going to pop up the flowers and the sentiment on some foam tape. I just felt like there needed to be a little bit of distinction between, I just felt like having the flowers and the sentiment popped up gave them a little bit more dimension and helped them stand out a little more. So there is foam tape behind the flowers, and then the sentiment is glued down with just 2 layers of cardstock, flat and direct to the card. I do feel like this needs a little bit of shine, so in a little bit we will go ahead and add some of that shine. This I thought about gluing to the inside of the card, but decided not to. Just because it is a smaller card size, I wanted to make sure that there was plenty of room for the person to write their sentiment. This one, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pop up both of those flowers with some foam tape from Altenew. It's Instant Dimension foam tape from Altenew. And the sentiment, I'm just going to go ahead. One of them was stamped a little nicer than the other, so I just glued the not so good one behind. And then this gives this sentiment just a little bit more heft. And I do end up popping that up with a little bit of foam tape also. But at this point, I just figured I would pop up the flowers with the foam tape at this point. But as I was looking at it, I felt like putting an embossing folder background would make it too busy. And I felt like the white was making it look incomplete and the flowers and the sentiment kind of getting lost. So I just took some more of that Hot Mama ink and just did a light wash of color all over. It isn't a very smooth blend. It's not a very consistent blend. But I just wanted there to be a little bit of distinction between the white back of the sentiment and the cardstock base. And so I think that that little bit of purple really did help. And it does kind of smooth out a little bit as it dries, but for now it does look pretty splotchy. So again, I did add foam tape behind both of the flowers and then foam tape to the right-hand side of that sentiment just because it does overlap that flower and to make everything sit flush and straight. Flush and flat. I did make sure that I didn't add any of the foam tape to the left under the H, and I just put a little dot of glue there as you saw just to make sure that that adhered flat. When this was all done, I had one of those Dracula flowers hanging around, and I didn't want to put that back in the packaging. I've discovered that I say I'll put things in the packaging and use it later, and I find out that I never really do. And so I was like, okay, well, we'll just make another card. So this is another Sizzix and Elison embossing folder. They are not named. But any embossing folder you have will work. This one almost looks like snakeskin to me. And I was trying to make this arrangement work, and I just didn't like it. It just looked weird to me. But when I flipped it up to the top and then snuggled the greeting underneath, I was like, okay, this looks a lot better. So this is how it is going to end up on the card. I do shift it down a little bit. And I do add the foam tape behind the flower again and behind the sentiment, just because I did feel like that needed a little bit of lift again. This is all 3 cards complete. This one is A2 size, so 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and these other 2 are 4 1/2 by 4 1/2 square. The square cards I will put into a 5 by 7 envelope, just so that they won't require extra postage. The other one will go in a regular envelope. And I went through my stash and added just some bling that I found that I felt coordinated, and just kind of finished everything off. So thank you for spending time with me. We'll see you next time.